Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As you just heard, my name's Mark Ormrod. I'm a former Royal Marines Commando, and on Christmas Eve 2007, I became the UK's first triple amputee as a result of the conflict in Afghanistan. And I've been very kindly invited along here today to share my story with you all and talk a little bit about some of the adversity that I've faced in my rehabilitation and how, while going through my rehabilitation, I discovered the importance of goal setting. Now, I usually bore people to death for over an hour when I do this, but I'm a bit limited today to 40 minutes. So what I've had to do is cut out a chunk at the beginning and just concentrate on the nitty-gritty and around the time I was injured and everything that happened after that. So, rewind the clock a few years back to 2007. I was serving with the Royal Marines, a unit called 40 Commando down in Taunton, and we were next on the roster to deploy to Afghanistan. We had spent most of 2007 training, getting all the logistics in place that we needed for a deployment, all the training we needed, everything we needed to do to be up to very, very high standards to be able to deploy for 6 months. And on the 7th of September 2007, that's exactly what we did. The unit grabbed their bargains, hopped on a plane from RAF Brize Norton, and we deployed to Afghanistan. Now, you guys have all heard of Camp Bastion? Okay, so when you fly into Afghanistan, you go into Camp Bastion, and a lot of people stay there, and they work back there for their tour. And for people like myself, we spend a couple of days there, and we acclimatise to the weather. We train in those conditions so that our bodies adapt to the heat and the obvious dryness. And then we get deployed out to what are called FOBs, which stands for Forward Operating Base. So I spent about a week with some of the guys from my unit at Camp Bastion, and eventually a handful of us were grabbed, thrown on the back of a Chinook helicopter, and flown out to a place called FOB Robinson. A FOB is in effect a base. It's just a fancy name for one. We have lots of fancy names in the military. That's one of them. And this is in the area where what you'd see on the Ross Kemp documentaries. Camp Bastion is about an hour's flight away from there. And are there any guys from Liverpool here? Okay, I heard this, I didn't make this up, but you're statistically more likely to get shot in Liverpool than you are in Camp Bastion. Well, I don't want to offend anybody when I say that. So we flew out into FOB Robinson, which is what I just said, where you see in the Ross Kemp documentaries, everyone's getting rocketed, mortar bombed, shot at, stabbed, pretty much on a daily basis. And while we were there, our responsibilities were, to us, pretty basic, and it's what all the guys that work out of these places do on a daily basis. So we had to obviously defend that FOB with the help of American forces, Dutch forces, and forces from all over the world. We had to mount foot patrols, and we had to go out into the local area and do what we call dominate the ground. We had to engage with the local civilians under what we call hearts and minds, and help them wherever we could, make life a little bit easier for them. If there were weapon caches found, we'd have to go and take them or destroy them. And then, the same with the enemy. If we were told they were in a certain place and we had to go out and take them out, then that's what we did. So we were doing that for about 2 months, and then, if I remember rightly, about mid-December, a lot of our guys flew home on 2 weeks R&R, which meant that we had a huge decrease in manpower. So whereas we've been going out every 1 to 2 days foot patrolling now we were restricted to just defending the FOB. And when you're out in Afghanistan, you may not think it, but you're being watched all the time. There's enemy watching your movements all the time. So to go from being out on the ground all the time to then suddenly completely stopping was something that I think worried our boss, the officer in command of us. So he was very keen that when we had some more guys flown in, that we'd get straight back out there and carry on doing what it was that we've been doing up to that point. The 23rd of December, that helicopter landed. A load more men came off to help bolster our manpower, and the guys at the HQ formulated a plot for a foot patrol. And the next day on Christmas Eve, they dragged myself and a handful of guys up to the HQ compound, and they gave us a brief on what was to be a very basic foot patrol, effectively just to get us back out on the ground and show that we were still there and that we weren't hiding, or if people that are watching us may have thought something was wrong. So our boss was very keen to get us back out there and show that we were still there doing our job. 2 sections, 8 men in each section, went up to the HQ compound and were briefed. And if you imagine, just for ease, if you imagine the PowerPoint screen, a big square as the shape that our fob was, there was a gate at the top and a gate at the bottom. And the idea was basically that one section would go north, one section would go south. We'd spend 3 or 4 hours out on the ground doing exactly what we've been doing nearly every day up until that point. Meet at the bottom gate, come back into the fob, hang around for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So, again, if we're being watched, people would think that we're done for the day. Then we would go back up the top gate again. The guys that went north now go south, and the guys that went south now go north, just to get fresh eyes on the ground. And that was that's as basic as it gets, and that's all it really was. I was second in command of the section that went north, and we were just finishing up the first leg of the patrol. Now, when we stopped to come back into the camp, we found ourselves on a really high piece of ground, what we called the North Fort. And because we were so high up, it gave us a huge tactical advantage if we were engaged by the enemy. The other section weren't so lucky. If you imagine, we're up here, the base is here, and the other section were even lower than that, so they were very, very vulnerable. So we were tasked with giving overwatch in case we were engaged. So the section commander took his after the section where he needed them and put them into fire positions. And I took 3 of my guys, and I found a shallow little bowl in the ground, which that was the only cover that there was. You're supposed to find the best possible cover from sight and from fire in those situations, and that was all that was on offer. So I positioned 3 guys in this small shallow bowl to give them some cover, and then I found what I thought at the time was the perfect position for me. So I made my way over to the gap, went to get down onto my knee to go onto my stomach, and there was just a huge explosion. I'll just go back one. If you look at the ground in this picture, there was sand, dust flying everywhere. I couldn't see anything. I could hear guys all around me shouting, screaming, trying to figure out what had happened. And I didn't feel any pain, which initially made me think that I was fine. And I was thinking we'd maybe been hit with a rocket or some sort of mortar bomb, which had hit the ground, exploded, caused this giant sandstorm, which had stopped me being able to see anything. And I thought I was okay. Now, my initial reaction was where there was cover, the only place I knew there was cover in a small forestry block was in front of me, directly in front of me when I went to get down onto my belly. But for whatever reason now, I thought it was behind me. So I was talking to myself in my head. I still couldn't see anything. Everything was, all the sand and dust was up, and it stopped me being able to see anything. And I was talking to myself in my head saying, turn around, see where this came from and start firing. If I could ID where this came from and start laying down fire, all the other guys in the section would do the same. And then the guy with the big .5 in the camp would come out and just obliterate everything. So I'm trying to turn, and I still can't see anything. There's still a huge cloud of dust and sand in front of me. And something told me in my head that I wasn't moving, and I couldn't really figure out why it was. And then as the dust and the sand settled, I realized what had happened. I looked down to where my legs were, and there was nothing there. Literally from the knee down, the bone was still there, but the flesh, the muscle, and the tissue had been taken off. And then the reality of the situation started to sink in. So I looked around me to see if everyone else was okay, and they had been blasted out of this hole quite some distance. This shallow bowl, what we were in originally, after reading the Americans' report when they cleared the area, was now 12 feet deep by, I think, 15 feet around. So quite a big explosion. And I realised, that what I'd done. And what will astound you is, what seems like a lifetime. A lot of stuff goes through your head in a very short space of time. But it seems like a lot longer when you're in that situation. And I've got a daughter who's now 8. And the first thing I thought about was my daughter. Was she going to get picked on when I went back home? When I pick her up from school, would the other kids make fun of her? I started thinking, I was 24 years old at the time, and I started thinking, somebody's going to be lumbered with me for the rest of their life. And, I'm quite an independent person. I didn't want to put that burden on somebody else's life. So, literally, this all happened in a space of about 8 or 10 seconds. I made the decision that I wanted to shoot myself. It wasn't something that I wanted to go and live with. So I made that decision, and if I was able to, I think that's what I would have done. But as I looked to the right to get my rifle, I noticed it was about 15 feet away from me, as well as my body armor. Now this stuff is strapped on tight. The body armor, and you've got a rifle with a sling on. It's on there real tight, and I couldn't understand why it was 15 feet away from me until I looked back towards my body, and then I saw my arm, which was pretty much from the bicep to the wrist, split open in half. There was no bone in it; it had been shattered completely. And I picked my hand up. My hand was still semi-intact, and just sort of stared at it in disbelief. Dropped it into the sand, and just screamed. Not like a girl would scream, like a war cry type scream. Just out of frustration. It's really hard, and I keep saying this is really hard to tell you how many things go through your head in a very quick amount of time in a situation like that. And so, still, I guess, feeling sorry for myself and a bit frustrated, I turned to the section commander, who was a friend of mine that I went through training with. And I asked him to shoot me. I told him I didn't want to go home like this. I didn't want to be a burden to anybody. Obviously, he didn't. He's a lot more level-headed than I am. But he then took charge of the situation and kept me calm and kept me responsive and kept me talking. And one of the things that I always say when I talk about this, what I found amazing was you go through a lot of training before you go on a deployment of that scale. And if you were to put a bunch of guys in a classroom and say, give them a paper test and ask what they would do in this situation, they probably wouldn't get a very high pass rate. But when it actually happens, I don't know what happens in their brain, but everything just clicks. And these guys were like a well-oiled machine. I had a guy who was 8 weeks out of training clearing a route to me, a safe route, and marking it with mine tape so that when the medic came, he wouldn't risk setting off any other improvised explosive devices. Unbeknown to me, a guy had already radioed back to the headquarters, and they were scrambling out a medic to get to me. And anyone else who didn't have anything to do was in a defensive position in case we were followed up with a small arms attack. So I'm in this huge crater now, letting off loads of my man screams, just waiting to get rescued. And then I hear this diesel engine tearing out of the camp, so I know the medic's on his way. I hear it stop and start idling. I've closed my eyes at this time, and I was pretending that I was off on holiday on a beach somewhere just to try and relax myself. And I hear the guys scuttering up now, up this big incline to get to me up on this high piece of land. And he gets there and he introduces himself as Dave. Nice to meet you, Dave. I'm Mark. And then he shot me with morphine, which I appreciate because it was starting to hurt a little by now. And what he did in that situation was he gave me one of my tourniquets. He applied tourniquets to my limbs to stop the bleeding and tighten them up as much as he could. He made me get involved in that process because I had my eyes closed and I was relaxing and not talking a great deal. That was his way of keeping me responsive and keeping me alive. So we put the tourniquets on, and I still, I'm not in a great deal of pain considering the circumstances. And they got me to a position where they were ready to move me. And they got out a stretcher, and Dave put his hands under my armpits, and he pulled me. And as he pulled me, I let out another one of my manly screams, and I had a really sharp shooting pain in my right leg. And so I looked down my leg to where the pain was coming from, and I could see my boot on the ground. If you imagine this has come sideways, everything from my knee down's missing, but there was this strand coming out of my thigh into my boot. So I picked my boot up, and I looked inside it, and my foot was still in there, and whatever this strand was, the weight of the boot had kept it there. When he'd moved me, it had stretched it, which had caused me the pain. So I had to pick my own foot up and cradle it on my stomach while I got taken off of this high feature and put into the back of a vehicle. It gets worse in a minute. So they throw me in the back of this vehicle, and the guy driving, the sergeant major in charge, is flooring it as fast as he could. And at this point, we're right down where the other section were, beneath the height of the base, and you had to go up a big incline to get back in. And when you were driving, because of the ground, it was really loose. There was always a point where you had to floor the accelerator to get the vehicle up, or it would have slid down under the loose footing. So the guy driving, he knew this. He got to the point, he floored the accelerator, and the doctor fell out the back, which I thought was hilarious, until I went out after him. As the bottom of my back hit the tailgate of this vehicle, the guy driving turned around out of instinct, I guess, and just grabbed whatever he could, which happened to be my femur bone, and held me half in, half out of vehicle by my femur bone. So his world's falling apart right now. He doesn't know what to do. He carried on, left the doctor. Doctor would have been fine. Left him, got me to the helicopter landing site, and the last thing I remember is the helicopter landing, the sandstorm that created, and the heat from the exhaust as it landed, and then the tailgate coming down. Now, what happened next is what the medical team have told me since I've met them after. Now, there was another guy that was injured in the blast. He'd got shrapnel in his back, so it wasn't life-threatening. So we were both put on this helicopter together. Now, it sounds harsh, but if you're in this situation and you've got a guy that's dead and a guy that's dying, you categorize the casualties, and the dead guy gets put in the corner, and you save the life of the guy that's dying. So they tried feeling for a pulse, and I didn't have one. When they tried putting fluids in me, all my veins had collapsed. And when they put a mask on me, it wasn't steaming up. So I showed no signs of life, so I got shoved in the corner while they got to work on Milky, trying to remove the shrapnel from his back and stop the bleeding. Luckily for me, one of the medics walked straight past me, and they said that my eye fluttered, which to them was a sign that I was still alive. I know dead guys twitch and stuff because of gases, but this was one of their indicators that I was still alive. And very lucky for me, they told me that they just pioneered a new technique where if you couldn't get fluids into me, because there were no veins, they would drill straight into my bone. So I guess the guy took his Black & Decker, drilled straight into my hip bone, put fluids in me, and they said within 3 minutes I was conscious again. And now I was trying to entertain the flight crew because I thought I was a comedian when I came around. It's just the way that guys in the military deal with these situations. They use dark humor. So I entertained the crew all the way back. We flew back to Camp Bastion. I got out, apparently still talking, trying to tell jokes. Got to the operating theatre, which at that time was just a tent. And the surgeons got to the point where they said, this is silly now. We need to knock this guy out and operate on him to save his life. So that's what they did. They knocked me out, and they amputated both my legs above the knee and my right arm above the elbow. Now, I've took some of the squeamish slides out of this, what I usually do, and just left with a final one of how I was left on Christmas Eve. Now, something I need to get clear is I went through 28 pints of blood and plasma and all those fluids and stuff. So the box is a little small, but I lost a lot of blood. And you know what? That's my justification, okay? That's all I'll say on it. And so from there, when they stabilised me, they flew me back to Birmingham, to Selly Oak Hospital in Birmingham, where I spent 6 days in a coma and a further 5 weeks on the bones and plastics ward and the high dependency unit. About 3 weeks into my recovery, a doctor came in to see me who just introduced himself as the leading medical professional in the country when it comes to amputations. And he came in and basically told me, non-emotional, that I was never going to walk again, and the best that I'd ever hoped for is like Lieutenant Dan has at the end of Forrest Gump, like basically the end of a crutch with a foot on it. And that was going to be so hard that I'd probably just give up anyway. And then he walked out of my room and left me. So, and I'm always honest when I say this. If I could have took my life that night, then I probably would have. The way that guy made me feel by telling me that made me not want to live or even bother trying. But luckily for me, the next day, I get a knock on my door, don't recognise the guy. Someone busts up and comes in my room who was wearing a set of prosthetic legs, the exact same ones that I'm wearing now. And he sat down and he introduced himself to me, told me a story about how he'd been hit by a suicide bomber in 2005, 1/7 in Iraq. And he spent about 6 hours in my room. And he took his legs on and off, and he told me how they work. They're very technical. They require plugging into laptops and computer software and all that kind of stuff. So he spent six or 7 hours talking me through everything and telling me what I could realistically expect to achieve compared to what the doctor had told me. So that got me excited, lit a little fire in my stomach and got me keen to start learning and seeing, what other people in my situation were achieving with their lives. Being a Royal Marine, you want to push yourself, and you've always got that standard that you hold yourself to that you want to try and achieve in every area of your life. So in my mind, Marines have egos. If this Army guy can do this, I'm going to do this in half the time that he's done it. And it motivated me. So I called all the physiotherapists, all the doctors, all the surgeons into my room, and I said, tell me the truth. Tell me what I've got to do now, right now from today, to start working, to be ready for when I get these legs, when I've healed up, all my scars have closed, and I'm in a healthy position, and I'm able to start learning to walk. So they explained that I don't have any calf muscles anymore. A lot of my big muscles were gone. And I'd have to retrain the smaller muscles in my body, which were my core, my bum, hips, lower back, all those areas were what I needed now to be able to walk. So it was very short, maybe 3.5 weeks after I was injured, I got them to take me down to the gym and start working on this stuff. Very, very basic stuff. It was taking me an hour, 40 minutes to get out of a bed into a wheelchair at that point. So we started very, very basic rehab. And every day I was getting stronger, and I built it up and I built it up because I wanted to be at a point when I was healthy and I could put get issue with my prosthetic legs, that I could just hit the ground running. So after 6 weeks in total in hospital, I moved to Headley Court Rehabilitation Centre, where I was to start the long road to recovery. That's the second day that I got there. Like I said, I'm impatient. So I got them to cast my legs so that I could get these prosthetics issued a lot quicker. And I explained to all the physiotherapists and my recovery team there what I'd been doing in hospital and what my aims were, my goals were, and asked them that we could build on that. But the difference was now we had 8 hours a day to do it rather than 1 or 2. And I started doing a more intense rehab program. And then I kind of thought to myself, this is okay. I'm getting to a certain level. Each week I'm getting better. But I need something to focus on, to really make me push it a little bit harder. Now, if you go back to the beginning, we deployed in September. I was injured on Christmas Eve. It's now February '08. The guys are still out in Afghanistan, and they've still got a few months after the deployment. When they came back, I knew they would have had 8 or 9 weeks leave. Then they would come back to the unit. We'd start drill training for a medals presentation where all the guys' families come from all over the world, and you're presented with your operational medal. So I put that as a target, that I wanted to walk onto that parade ground, stand shoulder to shoulder with the guys that I'd fought beside, and receive my medal in the only way which I thought was acceptable. And I did a lot of thinking about what's it going to take to achieve that. How I can't just give myself some blasé goal and just try and reach it. There were a lot of steps involved, and these were the things I came up with, which is what I needed to achieve what I wanted. Now, prosthetics is very complicated. It's not a case, remember I just said it took an hour, 40 minutes to get from a bed to a chair? You can't just go from having your legs amputated to being full height and living like I live now. There are a lot of stages you have to go through and progressions. And time was against me, so I was really keen to go through them as quickly as I could and get to where I needed to be. Now, has anyone ever been in a wheelchair before? Temporarily or anything? No? It's not nice. It's you take a lot of frustrations out on the poor person that's pushing you, even though it's not their fault. But I'd be in town, with my now wife, and someone would come up and they'd speak to us, and they'd ask her how I was doing, and I'm like down at their belly button waving at them, and then she'd take me into one of these women's shops, and you know how you women get excited when you go shopping, and she'd shove me in a clothes rack and just leave me. And it's very difficult to operate a wheelchair with one hand, so I was stuck, looking at the latest summer collection in Miss Selfridges. So I was very keen to get out of that thing as quickly as I could. But while I was in it, I would keep on trying to build on all these exercises that they gave me back in the hospital to continue preparing myself for the prosthetics. Now, the next stage is what we call stubbies. Great if you want to go to a Christmas party as an elf or as an Ewok. But I had an issue, and I think a lot of guys have an issue with wearing these when you first get them because of the appearance that, because of the way you look. But what it did was, it gave me all those exercises that I was doing in rehab. This let me actually put them in real-time situations, walking instead of doing it on a plinth in a physiotherapy suite, and be able to build to that next level on everything that I've been training and doing to this point. And one of the funniest things, this is a bit irrelevant, but one of the fondest memories I have from that time was stopping halfway through a pee and appreciating that I was stood up weeing again. Because you take that for granted, guys, but when you can't do it, when you have to hang off the end of a wheelchair to go to the toilet, you forget how good it feels. So that's just one of my good memories from the stubbies. But it allowed me to run around the house, out to the back, on the grass, go up and down stairs, up and down slopes. It gave me my hand back because I wasn't using a wheelchair, so I could carry cups of tea and stuff around the house all the time, building and strengthening my muscles. Until eventually, I was able to get the full-length prosthetics. Now, I can't explain to you how hard this was. Royal Marines training is the hardest regular forces infantry training in the world. This was probably a little bit harder. Just to walk one length of those parallel bars, the first time I did it, I had to sit in my wheelchair, go to my room and sleep. That's how much energy it took. It takes me now 300% more energy just to stand on the spot than it does anyone else. So all day walking around, in the early stages, just used to wipe me out completely. But because I'd set that goal and I didn't want to let the lads down or any of my family down when the medals day came around, it was my motivation just to push on as hard as I could. And now for 8 hours a day, we were attacking things with these legs, attacking obstacles, building my endurance, building my strength. I still hadn't fully healed yet. I've got a huge chunk of flesh missing out my left thigh, which still hadn't healed. But I was willing to take that small setback if it put me back in a wheelchair temporarily. if I could achieve my goal. And the day came around, and with the aid of a crutch, I was able to, I got put in a wheelchair to the sidelines, and then I stood up and I was able to walk onto the parade ground and stand shoulder to shoulder next to the guys, like I always wanted to, and receive my campaign medal. Now the reason I put this slide in there is the guy in the middle was the guy that grabbed my femur. The guy driving the vehicle was my sergeant major, who's now a very good friend of mine, Bob Toomey. So it was a huge honour for me to have him be there to present that medal to me after what we'd been through together. And he's a very good friend of mine now to this day. So I went home on a Friday after the medals parade, feeling quite proud of what I'd achieved. And I started thinking, this is what I need to do now. This is the way I need to live my life. This has worked. It's been hard, but it's got me what I wanted. And I started thinking about what the next goal was. Now, because I cut a lot out at the beginning, I was in a relationship at the time. When I came into hospital, I was in a 3-day coma, and I woke up and I asked my girlfriend to marry me. And she had agreed, and we'd set a date, 2nd of May, 2009. So that was my next goal then, because she was never going to let me mess around with some bunch of idiot lads to walk on a silly medals day and then use a wheelchair at a wedding. So all I did was I took the model of what I'd done up to that point, and I just, again, kept on building on it, strengthening it, until I was able to walk down the aisle at my wedding day, stand through the whole ceremony, do my first dance, and then I did take the legs off later when someone gave me beer, because you don't want to be walking around a marquee with prosthetic legs on when you're drunk. And again, I woke up about 3 days later when my hangover had gone, and I felt really pleased with what I'd done up until this point, but I still wanted a little bit more. And so I thought, what's the next thing for me? I was wearing these legs part-time for special occasions, and I was using a wheelchair. I had a car with adaptions in it, and it was good, but it wasn't. I knew I could do more. Now, back when that guy came to visit me in hospital and told me about what I could expect to achieve, I got very proactive, and I started researching on the internet, looking at all the technology that was available, looking at what other guys had been achieving, because there were no triple amputees in the UK that I could go to mentor me. I was the first one. And I found one in America, a young guy, I don't know what age he was at the time, but in 2001, when he was 15, he'd been hit by a train out in California. It took both his legs and his right arm. His arm's slightly shorter than mine, but his injuries are very similar. And what this guy was doing was incredible. I honestly thought that I was some sort of legend in the rehab place, doing all this stuff. First guy with 2 limbs missing, I'm doing really great. Until I saw this guy, and I was like, holy cow, this guy was doing stuff what was just knocking my socks off. And so I wanted to meet him. So we got in contact, and I got in contact with his prosthetic company out in America, and we started talking, and they started helping me out with little bits I could do to try and get to that next level, to get the level that Cameron was at. And so we communicated for a few months, backwards and forward, and I did what they asked me, and I started training their way. And then they said, why don't you come out, meet Cameron, you can meet a whole bunch of other guys, because they have a big conference once a year where guys come from all over the world, amputees and prosthetists, and do some training for 3 weeks. So I thought, great. So we worked out all the details. I booked my ticket for the 9th of June, 2009. And then about 2 days before I was due to fly out, they contacted me and said, right, everything's good our end. Are you sorted? Yes, I am. Brilliant. Look forward to seeing you. By the way, you can't bring your wheelchair and you can't bring a carer. I can't explain how scary that was to me at the time. Being someone who used his wheelchair part-time, and always had somebody around me to help me out. They wanted me to travel to the other side of the world now, completely independently, carrying my own bags, negotiating airports. Heathrow Airport's not easy to get around anyway. So in all honesty, I thought about backing out. But then I kind of thought, I've got nothing to lose. If the very least, I'll go over and meet this guy, get a few tips and come home. So I took the plunge, and on the 9th of June 2009, I went to the States, and that was the last time I ever used a wheelchair. This June will be 4 years for me now, so it was a hard decision, but it was one that I'm glad that I made. And so I went over, and I met all these guys. Cameron's the guy in the green shirt, top left next to me. And these guys, you've got military veterans, you've got civilians that are in car accidents, loads of different people from loads of different walks of life, all slightly different injuries, but all coming together to learn and teach each other. And that's what we did. We trained. You can see the slide in the top right. I was walking up and down that driveway till 1 o'clock in the morning some days, trying to just get it, figure out how to use the leg properly to get down this driveway. We went to seminars in the bottom right where guys who were a lot further down the line than I was would tell us of their experiences. They'd try and teach us and train us a little bit. And it was just a really positive experience where lots of guys come there and go away a lot better off than when they came. And what doing that, going to that conference and meeting those guys did was give me the ability to do things I never thought I'd do again, and what people told me I couldn't do again. Skydiving is not that difficult. You just strap yourself onto some guy and fall out of a plane. But you can see from the top right that, excuse the pun, I kind of shot myself in the foot because I don't get away with anything now. I have to clean the house, decorate the house, and do all that stuff, or else my wife gives me a clip round the head. I learned to drive, which I'll talk about in a sec, and to do things like riding roller coasters, which never even crossed my mind when I lost my legs, that I would never be able to do again. And this is where I learned to have a little bit of fun with it as well and get a sense of humour, because I was still pretty angry, I guess, at that point. Everything was really difficult. But myself, the guy in the middle, Julian, who's missing his legs, and the guy with the white hat, Randy, he's the guy who programs the legs, does the training. He's Yoda to us. He sorts us out. So we went to Six Flags roller coaster park in Texas. 108 degrees, 8 hours of walking all day. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But we went around on all the roller coasters. And you get two types. You get a car you sit in, or you get one where your feet dangle. So we've been riding all day, and we got to the Batman, I think it's called, or the Superman, which is where your legs dangle. So me and Julian walk up, and this little 18-year-old spotty American kid just looked at us and his jaw hit the floor. He had no idea what to do. You can't let two guys with prosthetic legs on a roller coaster. So luckily, Randy, the guy with the hat, has dealt with this a million times and pulled the disability card. So we came to a compromise where he wanted us to take our legs off, which wasn't really an option because of the way you have to get them back on, and it would have been very embarrassing to be sat on the floor of this thing with everyone watching us. So if I take a 4mm Allen key, I can unscrew the bolts, two of the bolts in my knees, take the bottom half off, but keep the top half of my leg on, which was the perfect solution, which is what he let us do. So we got on, and we sat at the front of this roller coaster, and we went round, and we had, the time of our lives on this thing, and then it came back into the dock, the brakes jam on, and we slowly roll back into the docking station. This young kid, I don't know how old he was, saw me and Julian with no legs on, sort of followed us, and then just darted out of this place as quick as he could with his mum in tow, because he thought our legs had been ripped off by the roller coaster. So I learned to have a little bit of fun with it. If I take all my prosthetics off, I can fit in a suitcase. So come Halloween, if I put a little box outside the front of my house and write sweets on it, and wait till the kids come and just burst out and scare the hell out of them, you can have a good time. Now driving, this was a really big thing for me. If you're missing your legs but you've got both your arms, it will cost about £900 to adapt the car. And those adaptations can move from car to car, so you've got quite a good level of independence. But for me, it's nearly £20,000, and you can't move them from car to car without having them professionally removed and installed, which takes weeks. So that's how I started driving. But when I went to the States, like I said earlier, these legs are very high tech. they plugged them into a laptop and they programmed one of the other modes other than walking mode so that my leg would lock at a certain angle and I could operate the accelerator and brake in the car. And they taught me to drive. And I came back and I went to the rehab center and I talked to the driving specialist. And she humored me because she'd never seen anyone do it before. No one had ever been able to do it. And she's been disability driving for over 20 years. So she sat me in a little Nissan Micra, which was a manual, let me set my legs up, and I tore around Surrey in a little Nissan Micra, and she couldn't believe it. I then got the restrictions removed off my license, but I had to be restricted to an automatic car because I didn't have an arm at the time, so I couldn't hold the steering wheel while I was changing gear. But I was happy with that because now I ripped all the adaptions out of my cars. I don't need them. It doesn't cost me, nearly £20,000 every time I want to change my car. And I've got a bigger level of freedom and independence now. I'm not restricted to just one car. And now it only costs me £3.50 to adapt my car. I just masking tape a sanding block to my accelerator and away you go. So I got to a point now, I'm nearly done guys. I got to a point now where I was relatively happy with things that I'd achieved, the independence that I'd gained, the fact that I'd been out to the States and seen what is actually achievable with the technology if it's used correctly. And a guy approached me and said, would I mind getting involved in a charity run, to raise money for military charities? So I just said yes straight away as a next challenge. Didn't really ask many questions. I didn't even know if I could run at the time. And when I asked him what involvement he wanted me to have, he said, we want you to run. So I contacted the guys out in the States, told them my plans, told them what it was I wanted to do. They said, yeah, sure, it's possible. They gave me a list of, it's like having a car. They gave me a list of part numbers and makes and models of this kit I needed. I got the guys in the military to order it, and I started learning to run. And in 2010, myself and a bunch of guys, military guys, we ran from New York to LA to raise money over 3,500 miles for military charities. Now, my part in this whole event was to run 1 mile a day, which doesn't sound a lot, but if you go back to what I said about it taking me 300% more energy to stand on the spot, running you could probably say 600. The first mile I ever ran, I had to break it down, and by the time I'd finished, my body felt like what it did if I'd have ran 10 miles at a sprint with weight on my back beforehand. I nearly threw up, passed out, needed to rest, sleep. It was that difficult, and I did the typical military thing and didn't do any training before I went out there. So I just had to hit the ground running, literally. But like with the rehab, I built that up till I was doing 2.5 miles average a day. And then at the end of October, for the Royal Marines' birthday, I managed to push out 5 miles, which is my personal best, and something that I was very proud of. So in terms of independence, the driving was the best thing for me, and in terms of physical challenges, this was the best thing that I'd achieved to that point. I haven't added the slides, but just before Christmas, me and another group of guys recently finished I hand-biked, some guys ran and some guys cycled around the whole coastline of the country, another 3,200-mile event, again, raising money for military charities. Just doing stuff what people keep telling me I can't do. It's great proving people wrong, isn't it? So that's kind of like, that's my motivation. And that pretty much brings us up to where we are today with my story so far. A lot of people say to me, am I angry and bitter about what happened to me? Do I regret being in the military? My honest answer to that is no. And I don't just say that because I'm studying now. It's that's the way I genuinely feel. You may not think it, but I've been very lucky. I was 24 years old when I got injured, and I had a great time up until I was 24. I went through school normally. My childhood was relatively normal. I was privileged enough to undertake the career that I wanted to, albeit cut a little bit short. I really had a great life, and I still do. So there's nothing for me to be angry or bitter about. And when I go to the States and I travel the world and I meet other people, these are the guys that are my inspiration. These guys, there's not one of them with a sad look on their face, and what they go through in childhood compared to what I went through is on a different level. Continued surgery, continued shaving of their bones in their legs while they're growing, always being in a prosthetic clinic getting new sockets made for their legs because they're growing at such a rapid rate. The little girl, number 16, if I remember right, she had no hands either. And they just get on with stuff. They run around all day smiling, laughing, and just taking what the day throws at them and then just kicking it into touch. So if I ever do feel a bit sorry for myself, these are the guys that I look to, my inspiration, and they keep me going. I'd love to take any questions. Have I got any time to take some questions?
At the end of the time mark, just one thing I wanted to ask you, which you didn't cover, just briefly. How supportive in all this were the Marines for you?
The Royal Marines, I can't explain it fully, but it's not a job, and it gets drummed into your head from day one, is that it's a family. And that has never been more relevant for me than until I got injured. Nobody could do enough to help me out. I was treated like a grown-up, like a human. There's obviously a lot of rank divide in the military, and there's a very fine line between it. And that was so well tailored to make me feel comfortable, and that I could approach senior guys in the Marines if I needed to for help. That it couldn't have got any better. My family were so well looked after. Obviously a lot of them had to come off of work to come look after me up in Birmingham. They weren't out of pocket. They never had to want for anything. They had a welfare officer who just looked after everything that they needed. And that continues now. I left the military in 2010, and all it takes is a phone call, and there'll be someone helping me out when I need it. So they are fantastic, and that's why I love them.
Thank you. Thank you for being so inspirational. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, guys.